On this day, September 4th, 1781, the city of Los Angeles was founded. But what if I told you the city of Hollywood dreams and endless freeways was actually founded by black families? And what if I told you this incredible piece of history was deliberately erased and hidden for over a century? I'm not talking about some minor historical footnote. I'm talking about the majority of the founding families. More than half of the 44 people who established Los Angeles in 1781 were black or African descent. And here's the really shocking part. This erasure was so complete that today most people living in LA have no idea who actually built their city. We're talking about one of the most successful cover-ups in American history. Today we're going to go full detective mode to uncover how an entire city's origin story got rewritten and why the truth is finally coming to light. Picture this. It's September 4th, 1781. The sun is beating down on a group of 44 settlers trudging through what is now Southern California. They're carrying everything they own: tools, seeds, livestock, and dreams of a new life. These pioneers are about to establish El Puerto de Nuestra Señora la Reina de Los Angeles. I hope I got that right. The town of Our Lady, the Queen of the Angels. In a few centuries, this tiny settlement will become the sprawling metropolis known as Los Angeles. But here's where your history textbook probably never told you. When Spanish officials recorded that racial composition of these founding families, the documents tell an incredible story. According to the official colonial census, 26 of the 44 founders were listed as Negro, mulatto, or mestizo, or of mixed African heritage. That's not a typo. That's not a historical anomaly. More than half of the people who founded what would become America's second largest city were black. So how did this story disappear so completely that even most people from Los Angeles today have never heard of it? To understand how Los Angeles really came to be, we need to go back to the Spain's colonial strategy in the 1700s. The Spanish Empire controlled vast territories across the Americas, but California, it was a problem child. It was expensive to maintain, difficult to defend, and it was sparsely populated. Russian fur traders were creeping down from Alaska, and the British were eyeing the Pacific coast. Spain needed settlers, and they needed them fast. But here's where the Spanish policy gets really interesting. Unlike other European powers who primarily recruited white settlers, the Spanish had developed a complex understanding of who actually succeeded on their frontier. Spanish administrators noticed that the people of African and mixed heritage were often more successful at frontier life. They were experienced with diverse climates, skilled at agriculture, and they had the survival skills that they developed over many generations. In Spanish colonial thinking, they were the ideal colonists. So when Felipe de Neve, the Spanish governor of California, put together the Los Angeles expedition, his recruiters specifically sought out these families. They offered incredible incentives, everything from free land, livestock, farming tools, and a guaranteed salary for a couple of years. The expedition wasn't random. It was very carefully planned. Each family was chosen for specific skills. There were farmers, blacksmiths, soldiers, and craftsmen, and the majority happened to be of African descent. Now, let me introduce you to some of these founding families. There was Jose Vangellas, listed as Indian, who brought crucial knowledge of local agriculture. Maria Antonio Campos, described as mulatto, whose family would become major landowners. The Merino family, and yes, Merino literally means dark-skinned in Spanish. And then there's the Pico family. Antonio Franco Pico was listed as mulatto in the original records. His descendants would become some of the most powerful people in California history. The settlement they established wasn't some struggling outpost. It was remarkably successful right from the start. These families knew what they were doing. Within a few years, they had established thriving farms, built a church, and created a functioning local government. The black and mixed-race families weren't marginalized. They were the community leaders. Take Pio Pico, grandson of the original founder Antonio Pico. He became the last Mexican governor of California, one of the wealthiest men on the West Coast, and owner of vast cattle ranches. When Americans talk about the Spanish dons of old California, they're often actually referring about families from African descent. The Reyes family, also of African heritage, became major landowners in what is now Westwood and Bel Air. Some of LA's most expensive real estate today sits on a land that was originally granted to black founding families. This success continued for decades, though through Mexican independence in 1821 and well into the American period after 1848, these families maintained their prominence. They intermarried with other elite families, served in government, and shaped the region's development. So what changed? How did the story of black founding families get completely erased? The answer lies in the 1880s, when Los Angeles experienced its first major population boom. The Transcontinental Railroad reached Los Angeles in 1876, and suddenly thousands of white settlers were pouring in from the Midwest and East Coast. Real estate developers saw an unprecedented opportunity. But selling California to white settlers required the right narrative. Developers weren't just selling land, they were selling a lifestyle, a dream, an identity. And that dream needed the right kind of history. Enter the romantic myth of old California, a fantasy of noble Spanish dons, beautiful senoritas, and pastoral ranchos. This wasn't just marketing, it was historical revisionism on an industrial scale. Tourism boards hired writers to create romanticized histories. Publishers produced guidebooks that emphasized Spanish colonial grandeur while quietly omitting any mention of African heritage among the founding families. The process was systematic and deliberate. City boosters, historians, and civic leaders made conscious choices about which version of history to promote. The Spanish colonial fantasy sold real estate. The multiracial reality, it didn't. But the erasure went deeper than just the marketing materials. School textbooks began teaching the romanticized version. Official city histories adapted the whitewashed narrative. Even academic historians started repeating the myth without checking the original sources. The most insidious part? Even some descendants of the original families began denying their African heritage. In an increasingly segregated society, being Spanish opened more doors than being black or mixed race. Families quietly changed their stories to fit the acceptable narrative. By the early 1900s, the transformation was complete. Los Angeles had successfully rebranded its original story from a diverse frontier settlement to a romantic Spanish colonial fantasy. What makes this erasure even more shocking is how thorough it became. We're not talking about a few missing details. We're talking entire family histories were rewritten. And ironically, Hollywood, founded in a city established by black families, began producing movies that reinforced the Spanish Don mythology. Films like Ramona and countless westerns depicted California's past as an exclusively white and Hispanic story. Even the academic institutions joined the cover-up. UCLA, USC, and other universities built their California history programs around the romanticized narrative. Professors might have questioned the story, simply accepted the existing accounts without examining primary sources. The California Historical Society, museums, cultural institutions, they all adopted the whitewashed version. Exhibits, monuments, and official commemorations consistently ignored the African heritage of the founding families. Perhaps most tragically, this erasure robbed generations of black Californians of their rightful place in the state's founding narrative. While the country debated civil rights and equality, one of the most powerful examples of black achievement in the American West, it remained hidden. The irony is stunning. During the very decades when black Americans were fighting for recognition and equality, the story of black founding families in America's second largest city remained buried in the archives. So the truth might have stayed hidden forever if it were not for the social upheavals of the 1960s. The civil rights movement didn't just challenge contemporary racism, it forced Americans to re-examine their history. Dr. Jack Forbes, a Native American historian at UC Davis, was researching indigenous populations in colonial California when he stumbled across something extraordinary in the Spanish archives. The original settlement records for Los Angeles told a completely different story than what he'd learned in school. Forbes wasn't looking for African-American history. He was studying Native populations. But the Spanish colonial records were so detailed and explicit about racial categories that he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. The Spanish, they kept meticulous records. They didn't just list names, they recorded detailed information about racial background, family relationships, social status, and economic activities. Every founding family's heritage was documented with bureaucratic precision. Forbes began cross-referencing these records with other documents, the birth certificates, marriage records, land grants, and census data. The pattern was undeniable and consistent across multiple sources. Other historians joined the investigation. Dr. William Mason at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, he began his own research. Miriam Matthews, one of the first black librarians in Los Angeles, started connecting the dots between archival records and family oral histories. What they found was explosive. Not just the racial composition of the founding families, but evidence of a systematic cover-up that hid this history for nearly a decade. Or nearly, not a decade, a whole century. By the 1970s, the evidence was overwhelming. Multiple independent researchers had reached the same conclusion using different sources and methodologies. The founding of Los Angeles was primarily the achievement of black and mixed-race families. But even with solid evidence, challenging a century of accepted history wasn't easy. Academic institutions that had built their reputations on the Spanish colonial narrative were reluctant to acknowledge their errors. Tourism boards and city officials worried about how this revelation might affect Los Angeles' carefully cultivated image. Some descendants of the original families had mixed reactions. Pride in their heritage conflicted with generations of social conditioning. Gradually, though, the truth began to surface in academic circles, and then the community organizations, and then finally the mainstream media. But the process was slow and often met with skepticism. Today, there are modest acknowledgments of this history. A small plaque downtown mentions the diverse origins of the founders. Some schools now teach about the real demographic makeup of early Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Public Library has exhibits on the founding families. But these recognitions feel almost inadequate compared to the scale of the erasure. For almost a century, millions of people learned a false version of their city's history. The story of Los Angeles' founding is really about the power of narrative to shape reality. For more than 100 years, a carefully constructed myth replaced documented historical fact. This matters because history isn't just about the past. It shapes how we see ourselves and imagine the future. When we erase the contributions of black families to the founding of other major American cities, we're not just challenging yesterday's story. We're limiting how people understand their place in today's world. The families who founded Los Angeles succeeded because they brought the skills, determination, and vision to an untamed frontier. Their story isn't one of triumph, achievement, and community. Actually, their story is one of achievement, triumph, and community building, exactly the kind of history that should inspire rather than be hidden. So, the next time you see that famous LA skyline, or drive down Pico Boulevard, or visit downtown's historic core, remember, the city was built by black hands from day one. And that's just not a footnote in California history. That's the foundation everything else was built on. And that is your story for today, September 4th. This happened in 1781. Thanks all for watching. If you liked what you heard, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and we'll see you tomorrow for another exciting story.